start Lent next week. Ash Wednesday is this coming Wednesday night on the 10th. We'll be here at 7 o'clock to celebrate Ash Wednesday together and launch into our Lenten season. We like to offer a resource. There's a stack of these in the back. These are Lenten devotionals. If you would like to pick one up and use through the Lenten season to augment or to fulfill your spiritual journey through the season of Lent, please take one of these. There's several out there. Communion today is by the Super Bowl Shuffle. That's how you'll be coming forward. I went to church with a friend last night, visited her church. Her minister had an interesting vision of who God is in this season. God is a fan in the stands with a jersey that has your name on it. I thought that was cute. Theologically, it's powerful, though. The idea that Jesus has a jersey with your name on it says so much about God's relationship to us that, in truth, that relationship is God first. God is the one that takes the first step towards us. God is the one that maintains it. As much as we try to tend to that relationship, we're flawed, we're foible, we're limited, we're finite. And thanks be to God for maintaining a relationship that if it were completely up to us, we simply couldn't do it. Thanks be to God for wearing a jersey with your name on the back. This is the last Sunday of what we call Epiphany. It's a season that follows Christmas, and this season is all about naming Jesus Christ. We celebrate Jesus' birth at Christmas, and then we have this wonderful season to look at stories that remember who Jesus is in our life. And we usually conclude it with the Transfiguration story that Philip read for us today. Thanks, Philip, for doing that today. This is an amazing story because, in part, it's so cerebral. Now, I find that helpful because God is larger than my mind. And having a story like this pushes me to use my imagination to think larger about who God is. We have a story where Jesus is transfigured. I can only imagine that what's really happening at the top of the mountain. The three disciples that remember it for us are just groping for explanations and articulations and descriptions. And so we have this scene described where Jesus he changes in some way. His face turns, I guess, whiter, starts to glow or something. I'm thinking of the novenas that you see in artwork of the Holy Family. We don't know. We weren't there. They didn't take pictures for us. So we just have their attempts to describe. Moses and Elijah show up. These two figures from antiquity, figures who Jesus would have read their writings. Moses writing of the first 5 books of the Old Testament, and then Elijah's prophecies. Jesus would have studied those. These figures show up, and apparently 3 of them have a conversation about Jesus' departure. I don't know if they're talking about the Passion, or if they're going to talk about what happens to Jesus after his earthly ministry. It's these disciples trying to grapple with something that's really beyond our ability to name. That's simply how big God is. It is also a foreshadow. It is a foreshadow. Mountaintop experiences are that, right? Hopefully we've all had mountaintop experiences in our life. Moments when life has just gone so well that everything seems to be transfigured, seems to just have a special glow to it. Whether it's the first time you saw your child, or the first time you saw that person you want to love for the rest of your life, and life is just so amazing, stuff just kind of sparkles. I mean, those are those mountaintop experiences where life just all comes together, and between your ears, everything makes sense. At least for a moment, everything makes sense. And it's perfect, and it's beautiful. And this must be exactly what God meant for us to have. Hopefully you've had those moments. This moment must have been like that because personally, if I were praying and I open my eyes and there are a couple of ghosts standing in front of me, I'm either going to close my eyes and pray more, or I've decided I've prayed too long. But when Moses and Elijah show up, the experience of their presence with Jesus left the 3 disciples, Peter, James, and John, wanting to stay. I resonate with that. When I have those moments where, at least for the minute, everything makes sense in the world, I want to stay there. I don't want to go down the mountain. I know what's down the mountain. That's where I live too often. Too much of my life is down in the valley, where life doesn't make sense, where things are chaotic or just simply not just, not fair, not loving, not kind. Where I see people broken and damaged in ways that just should not be. And too often in ways that I can't fix on my own. I know it's down the mountain. I know why Peter, James, and John don't want to go down there. I know why Peter says, let's build tents. He's using a model from the wilderness journey of the Israelites when they left slavery. And when they would worship, they had the tabernacle that they carried with them, the ark, and they would build a tent for the ark. And it was amazing. God was journeying with them, and they were on their way to the promised land. I want to stay there. Why doesn't Jesus want to stay there? Jesus' ministry is not easy. He's had that time in the wilderness where he's tempted and tested. And that kind of stuff is happening to him all through his earthly ministry. And if he and Moses and Elijah were actually talking about that passion experience at the end, I wouldn't want to leave the mountaintop. Would you? Why come back down? But he does. Some people would argue Jesus comes back down the mountain so that Jesus can experience life like you and I. That Jesus' incarnation was an opportunity for God to experience what you and I experience. That God, being all big and infinite and divine, has trouble understanding what it's like to be small and finite and frail. So God sets aside some of that divinity and puts on full humanity to walk the walk that we walk. And then the blessing is you and I get to say, Jesus knows what I'm talking about because Jesus has been there. Jesus has been hungry. Jesus has had loved ones die. Jesus has been in conflicts. There's value to that. But it's more than that. Jesus made all this. I'm confident Jesus knows what we go through without actually having to walk in our shoes. That's the divinity stuff of Jesus. But there's value in that. But that's not all of it. Some people will say Jesus comes back down the mountain to do what Jesus was made to do, to fulfill Jesus' purpose. Teaching and preaching and healing people. And we read that through his earthly ministry. Jesus is raising Lazarus from the dead. The very first thing Jesus does when he comes down the mountain is go and heal a boy who has seizures. Jesus is reconciling relationships, calling the Samaritan woman at the well back into community from her position as an outcast. The woman who was guilty of adultery and about to be stoned, he steps into that situation and saves her life and shows the priority for forgiveness and love and compassion. Jesus comes down the mountain to do all of that stuff. Because now, that stuff is a foreshadowing of what's up the mountain. And in some way, he's pulling the mountain and the valley together. There's so much value in that. How thankful are we that Jesus comes down the mountain to do that stuff, to show us the power of God's love, to show us this alternate reality, that life does not have to be as we too often experience it. Life doesn't have to be the biggest always wins. Life doesn't have to be the early bird gets the worm and leaves nothing for anyone else. Life doesn't have to be rough. Life can be compassionate and kind. Community can be about all of us, loving all of us, instead of stratifying us across whatever stratification you want, whether it's race or economics or education or skin color or eye color or whatever crazy definition we use to divide one from another. Except jerseys, you can still do that. Jesus pulls the mountaintop and the valley together by coming down the mountain to show in the valley how much power Jesus has and how much power Jesus' way of life has to transform. Jesus is transfigured on the mountaintop and then comes down the mountain to do a ministry that transfigures all of us. Thanks be to God. Because God is not just the passive fan in the stand with a jersey with your name on it, but God leaves the stands to come down on the field and take care of you when you get hurt. Or to pat you on the back when you score the touchdown. Because God is actively and intimately involved in your life. But I think there's something even bigger going on about Jesus coming down the mountain. And I think it's because Jesus comes down the mountain quite simply because we need him to. It is great to read this story. Jesus gets named and claimed by God, and we get to see this amazing experience on top of the mountain. But quite frankly, we need to know. We need to know. And that's why Jesus comes down the mountain. Jesus dies on the cross to make our relationship with God perfect, straight, fixed, reconciled. God has the power to do that remotely. God has the power to fix that without having to suffer like that. But God does, as a demonstration of God's power over death, that not even death conquers God, and to demonstrate to you how much you're loved. More than just the cute image of God wearing a jersey with your name on it. God is one of those in God's life for you. That's how much you're loved by one so powerful. At the 9 o'clock service today, we celebrated Ford Chaplain Sunday. We were asked to host that on behalf of the American Legion this year. Ford Chaplain Sunday is an annual celebration by the American Legion across the nation of the sacrifice of 4 chaplains. In World War II, there was an Army transport ship that was going to Greenland to an American Army base. Had over 900 people on it between Army personnel plus the ship's staff. It was torpedoed and it sank. Over 2/3 of the souls on the boat did not survive. What's remembered about that sinking was the sacrifice of 4 chaplains. One of the survivors says, John Ladd, "It was the finest thing I have seen or hope to see this side of heaven." The 4 chaplains were remembered that during the chaos and panic of the sinking ship, they spread out across the deck to try and calm the sailors and the Army personnel, eventually handing over their own life vests to those that didn't have them. The story goes on to say that Ladd's response is understandable. The altruistic action of the 4 chaplains constitutes one of the purest spiritual and ethical acts a person can make. When giving their life jackets, Rabbi Kud, one of the chaplains, did not call out for a Jew. And Father Washington, another one of the chaplains, did not call out for a Catholic. Nor did Reverend Spox or Poling call out for a Protestant. They simply gave their life jackets to the next man in line. One of the survivors remembers trying to get back into his cabin because when he got topside, the Arctic air chilled him and he remembered he had forgotten his gloves. And Rabbi Kud stopped him in the hallway and handed over his gloves, saying that he had an extra pair. He handed over his life to save that man's life. Peter, James, and John came down the mountain with Jesus. I'm certain they did so first to follow this amazing person, Jesus Christ. They did so also so that they could be a witness like Jesus was. We read through the book of Acts after the Gospels about how these disciples lived their lives, gave their lives, invested their lives in a way so as to point to God, reminding their faith communities and those that they share their lives with who God was. But they also came down the mountain to do the work that Jesus called them to do. Sometimes we ask, what is it to be a follower of Jesus? What is it to be a Christian? Coming to church surely is part of that. Giving God our praise and thanksgiving and trying to find that mountaintop experience around the communion table where we come each week to celebrate the forgiveness that God has in our lives. Truly, that is a lot of what it is to be a Christian. But how much of being a Christian is about what we do beyond these walls to transform the relationships and the community that we are in the rest of the week? Whether it's following the example of these altruistic chaplains or doing good works down at the Good Samaritan house trying to transform a bedroom so that homeless people have a better place to live, we're called to take the foreshadowing of the mountaintop experience and share it with the lives around us. That's what it is to be a Christian. Not just because it makes a difference in somebody else's life, but because we need it. We need to know. And we get to know, and we get reminded when we transform other people's lives about how much our life has been transformed by God's love. When we go out and share the greatness of what we celebrate here with others, we are reminded. The good works make a difference. There's value to that. It makes a difference in someone else's life. And there's a value to that. But how much of this is about how much God loves you and gives you the opportunity to be reminded of that every time you make a difference in someone's life? Amen.